This film begins by showing a high school student named Kang Jin, who comes from a poor family. Because of this, he is always bullied at school. Every day, Kang Jin is ordered around by the richest student at his school, Nam Young, including doing his homework. Kang Jin's family's life is very hard. It gets worse because his parents are always being chased by loan sharks since they can't pay their debts, which keep growing due to high interest rates. On the other hand, Kang Jin's classmate named Young, who also comes from a poor family, often goes out with a promiscuous man to meet her needs. Back to Kang Jin. Even though he does all of Nam Young's tasks, Kang Jin is always bullied by Nam Young and his group. Nam Young even stamps Kang Jin's forehead, which embarrasses him even more. Another time, a loan shark boss named Rang visited Kang Jin's school to ask for money that Rang had sent to Kang Jin's family. But there, Kang Jin claimed he didn't know about the money, even though he was the one who found it first and kept it. After school, Kang Jin was walking home and saw De Young at a cosmetic shop. De Young looked confused because she couldn't afford the expensive lipstick she wanted. But then, Kang Jin, who secretly liked De Young, quickly approached and paid for the lipstick using the money he found from Rang. The next morning, De Young showed off her new lipstick to her friends, saying it was a gift from Nam Young. At that time, Kang Jin, who heard this, felt hurt because he had used the loan shark's money he took to buy the lipstick. Meanwhile, Nam Young, who didn't buy the lipstick, suspected De Young was cheating on him. He confronted her during a break, and she admitted that Kang Jin had given her the lipstick. At that time, Nam Young was furious when he found out Kang Jin had given the lipstick to his girlfriend. He wondered how a poor student like Kang Jin could afford such an expensive item. Then, Nam Young remembered seeing Kang Jin with Rang the day before, discussing the envelope of money. There, Nam Young concluded that Kang Jin had stolen Rang's money, so he decided to steal the money from Kang Jin's jacket pocket. When Kang Jin found out that the money was missing, he knew it was Nam Young's doing. Soon after, he bravely approached Nam Young to ask for his money back. Instead of returning it, Nam Young demanded that Kang Jin give him 500,000 won by next week. If he didn't do it, Nam Young threatened to tell Rang that Kang Jin was the one who took Rang's money. That evening, Rang visited Kang Jin again to ask where the money was. Seeing his nervous behavior, Rang realized that Kang Jin had taken the money. After some threats, Kang Jin admitted to taking it, but explained that someone else had taken it from him. But then, Rang took Kang Jin to his headquarters to punish him. Knowing that Kang Jin couldn't repay the money, Rang offered him a job to work off his debt. At first, he refused, saying he was still a student. But Rang convinced him that many students work and, given Kang Jin's poor situation, working was the only way to repay the debt. In the end, Kang Jin finally agreed to work for Rang. The next day, Kang Jin went to Rang's headquarters with two of Rang's other subordinates to learn about his new job. There, Rang explained that Kang Jin would find new customers who would borrow money from Rang. He also taught Kang Jin how to collect debts. As a first step, Kang Jin and the others would publicly embarrass borrowers who didn't pay their debts by telling everyone about the money they owed. At school, Kang Jin tried to embarrass Nam Young, who was giving a presentation. Loudly, he said that Nam Young had stolen his money. Unfortunately, no one believed him because they thought Nam Young would never steal from a poor student like him. Because of this, the teacher punished Kang Jin by making him do the presentation instead. After failing the first time, Kang Jin tried another method taught by Rang. He went to Nam Young's family company and loudly demanded that Nam Young pay back his debt in the lobby. This made Nam Young very angry because Kang Jin had embarrassed him in front of his family. At that time, Kang Jin's friend named Man-soo knew that Nam Young would want revenge. He quickly warned Kang Jin to leave school to avoid Nam Young and his gang. However, Kang Jin didn't care and gave Man-soo a business card, which confused him. Just as Man-soo thought, Nam Young's gang took Kang Jin to a karaoke place and beat him up. Strangely, Kang Jin didn't fight back at all, even though he was badly hurt. At the same time, Man-soo, who had followed where Kang Jin was taken, started to worry about his friend's condition. So, Man-soo called the phone number on the business card Kang Jin had given him. Man-soo asked the person on the phone for help and told them where Kang Jin was. It turned out that Kang Jin was carrying out the final step in debt collection, which is teaching a lesson to those who can't pay. Kang Jin had deliberately given Rang's business card to Man-soo, knowing he would call for help. Soon after Man-soo ended the call, Rang and his men arrived at the karaoke place and beat up Nam Young's gang. Nam-young was powerless against the loan sharks. Rang then forced Nam-young to sign an agreement with his fingerprint, declaring him in debt for the money he stole from Kang-jin. Just like other borrowers, Rang imposed a 10% interest per week if Nam-young didn't return the money. Nam-young refused, saying he was still a student and even threatened to report him to the police. But there, Rang calmly replied that he had a contact in the police who would help him avoid any charges. With no other choice, Nam-young was forced to sign the agreement. Since then, Kang-jin, who was always bullied before, became a respected student, even by Nam-young. Every week, Nam-young had to pay his debt with high interest. When he tried to refuse, Kang-jin threatened to tell Nam-young's parents about the debt, so he had no choice but to agree. Kang-jin even put a stamp on Nam-young, just like Nam-young used to do to him. At that time, Kang-jin felt happy because he was no longer looked down upon by other students. He also got some money from Rang for his work. One night, De-young, who felt guilty for making Kang-jin the target of Nam-young's beating, met Kang-jin to apologize. She told him about her family's struggles after her father's company went bankrupt. They talked about many things and became closer. Another day, Nam-young became more frustrated because he was running out of money. Kang-jin also made Nam-young hand over the debt payment in class to embarrass him. At that time, Nam-young had no choice but to follow Kang-jin's orders, and eventually, his gang started to avoid him because they didn't want to get involved with loan sharks. On the other hand, De-young was approached by a detective named Choi. He had received a report that De-young had stolen money from some men she had been with. One of the victims demanded that De-young pay back 4 million won. After giving her the report file, Detective Choi left, giving De-young some time to pay the victim back. Meanwhile, Kang-jin met with Rang, who ordered him to expand their business. There, Rang told him to find students who wanted to borrow money. Rang suggested targeting students from modest families who wanted to buy luxury items to show off. Interested in this, Kang-jin started to learn more about how loan sharks worked by going out and observing them. At school, many students began to dislike Kang-jin for controlling Nam-young. At the same time, Man-soo, who was close to Kang-jin, became braver against Nam-young's gang. The gang members were annoyed with Man-soo's attitude, but when they saw Kang-jin arrive in class, they backed off because they were afraid of him. Turns out, Nam-young had been absent from school for several days because he was frustrated about losing his power at school. He spent his time drinking, and a student named Shin-ji, who liked Nam-young, tried to stay with him and remind him to take care of himself. Another day, Kang-jin and Man-soo started offering loans to students. Many students, wanting to show off, borrowed money from Kang-jin despite the high interest rates. They even signed debt agreements with their fingerprints. Rang was happy with Kang-jin's success in attracting so many customers. With the money he earned, Kang-jin formed a gang and often went to parties. He was glad his life had improved so quickly. One day, Kang-jin's homeroom teacher approached him for a loan after learning about Kang-jin's loan business at school. Kang-jin was happy to lend money and even offered a discount if the teacher brought other teachers to borrow from him. Meanwhile, Nam-young felt his life was ruined and often got drunk with Shin-ji, who stayed by his side. One day, Ki-young approached Nam-young at a bar and told him that Kang-jin was gaining more control at school. Ki-young suggested they work together to bring down Kang-jin. Hearing that, Nam-young agreed, and they began planning to stop Kang-jin's dominance at school. The next day, Nam-young and his gang approached Man-soo, trying to turn Kang-jin's close friend against him. They told Man-soo that Kang-jin was only using him and that his salary as Kang-jin's assistant was too low, even though he helped Kang-jin with the loan business at school. There, Nam-young suggested that Man-soo should sabotage Kang-jin's business. After hearing that, Man-soo began to believe Nam-young's words when he felt like a servant after Kang-jin ordered him to buy food. Meanwhile, De-young's friend, Hee-won, approached De-young, who was sitting alone, and gave her some money. Hee-won knew about De-young's theft problem and wanted to help her resolve it. However, she refused Hee-won's help and asked her not to get involved. After De-young left, Shin-ji and her gang, curious about De-young's problem, took Hee-won's phone and found out that De-young was reported for stealing money from men. Without hesitation, Shin-ji reported this to Nam-young. That evening, Nam-young met with all the students who had borrowed money from Kang-jin. He convinced them to stop paying their debts all at once to ruin Kang-jin's loan business. The next day, Man-soo, who felt used by Kang-jin, started slacking off on collecting debts from students. At that time, Kang Jin's income dropped a lot because many people stopped paying their installments. Man-soo felt even worse when Kang Jin scolded him for not collecting money. That evening, Man-soo secretly visited Rang at his headquarters and asked for his own territory, saying it would make Kang Jin's job easier. But there, Rang pressured Man-soo to admit his true goal, which was to have his own territory and get paid like Kang Jin. Rang agreed to Man-soo's request. When Kang Jin found out, he was angry with Man-soo for asking for territory without telling him. Then, he tried to contact Rang's men to stop Man-soo, but they couldn't do anything since Rang had already given Man-soo the territory. Kang Jin was frustrated because he didn't have anyone to help him collect debts, especially since many students stopped paying all at once. At that time, Rang scolded Kang Jin for not being able to do his job and refused to send his men to collect from the students one by one. At the same time, the students in debt reported the loan sharks at school to the police. At first, the police didn't believe them until one student showed a photo of Rang, which surprised Detective Choi. Another day, Rang, annoyed because his income was decreasing, ordered his men to collect 1 million won from the parents of all the students who owed money. Meanwhile, Kang Jin became more stressed due to the lack of income from debt repayments. He even forced one student, who had already paid, to pay the next installment early, causing a commotion in the class. On the other hand, De-young met with Detective Choi, who offered to clear her name from the theft reports if she would sleep with him. However, De-young refused, saying she would rather solve the case legally than sleep with a corrupt officer. Later, Choi contacted Rang about the students' reports of loan sharks at school. It turned out that Choi and Rang knew each other, and he often took bribes from Rang to let him run his illegal business. There, Choi warned Rang to hide for the next 2 to 3 weeks because the police planned to investigate the loan shark case at the school. When Kang Jin found out about the student's report to the police, he rushed to Rang's headquarters for help. However, the place was empty because Rang and his men had already escaped, making Kang Jin even more panicked. That evening, Shin-ji and her gang approached De-young as she was walking home. Shin-ji threatened to spread the news about De-young's fraud case at school. De-young said she didn't care because she planned to turn herself in to the police. At that moment, Nam-young came to defend De-young, even though they had broken up. But there, Shin-ji felt hurt by his actions because she had always been there for him when he was feeling down. A bit later, De-young sat on a park bench and decided to surrender to the police and report Choi for his actions. She had recorded conversations as evidence. Soon after, Kang Jin, looking panicked, approached her. At the same time, Nam-young arrived and tried to beat up Kang Jin, but Man-soo showed up and saved both Kang Jin and De-young, taking them to a safe place. After escaping from Nam-young, Kang Jin and Man-soo argued until they realized that Rang had lied to both of them. Without them knowing, Nam-young and his gang found Kang Jin and the others. As Kang Jin and De-young tried to escape, Man-soo chose to face Nam-young and his gang. Man-soo ended up seriously injured after Nam-young hit him with a helmet. When Kang Jin and De-young returned, they saw Man-soo lying helpless and immediately took him to the hospital. While waiting for Man-soo's test results at the hospital, De-young shared her problems with Kang Jin. She admitted that she went to hotels with rich men not to sleep with them, but to steal their money. She decided to surrender to the police rather than sleep with the corrupt officer, Choi. After hearing that, Kang Jin supported her decision and reassured her that they would be okay after dealing with their problems. On another day, Rang received a call from Choi, who asked him to get rid of De-young because she could ruin Choi's career if she reported his bad action. Luckily, Kang Jin found out about Rang's plan to kill De-young and rushed to her house to save her. Meanwhile, Nam-young, who also learned about the attack, informed Hee-won, making her coming to De-young's house immediately. At De-young's house, Kang Jin, wearing a helmet, tried to help her, even though he got beaten by Rang's men. Just as Rang was about to kill De-young, Hee-won arrived and hurt him, saving her. The next day, Kang Jin and De-young went to the police station to solve their problems and report Choi for attacking her. They provided evidence from a conversation Rang had when Kang Jin was beaten. Unexpectedly, the helmet Kang Jin was wearing had a hidden camera that recorded all of Rang's crimes and his group's actions. At the end of the film, Nam-young is shown feeling unenthusiastic about going to school after Kang Jin was expelled due to various issues. While Nam-young was presenting in front of the class, Shin-ji suddenly spread a photo, making it seem like she was dating him. Then, feeling hurt by Nam-young's rejection, Shin-ji decided to jump from the school roof. This incident deeply humiliated Namyoung at school. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is don't mess with loan sharks or corrupt cops, but if you do, make sure your helmet has a hidden camera. Also, remember, trying to impress people with fancy stuff might just land you in a world of trouble.